Jake stood in front of Professor Kalish and 3 other senior Zentari doctors in the main medical laboratory. His hands were shaking, but he tried to keep his voice steady as he explained his plan. Behind him, Dr. Foster nodded encouragingly. "You wish to treat a quantum parasitic infestation with boiled plant matter?" Professor Kalish asked. His large black eyes showed polite doubt, but Jake could tell he was listening carefully. "My grandmother used tea made from specific plants to get rid of bed bugs," Jake explained. "The bugs on your world behave exactly like Earth bed bugs even, though they can phase in and out of normal space. Maybe the same treatment will work." Dr. Vexilla, the head of the medical department, made a sound that might have been laughter. "Young human, we have tried 17 different advanced treatments. Our molecular destabilizers cannot affect these creatures. What makes you think plant tea will succeed where our best technology has failed?" Jake had expected this reaction. He pulled out his grandmother's old notebook, which he had brought from Earth. The pages were yellow and filled with her careful handwriting about different remedies for common problems. She wrote down everything she learned about dealing with pests, Jake said. "Look at this recipe." She used chrysanthemum flowers, mint leaves, and lavender oil mixed together. She said the combination created a smell that confused the bugs. "Nervous systems." Dr. Foster stepped forward. "I have been thinking about Jake's theory. What if these quantum creatures have similar sensory systems to Earth insects? The chemical compounds in certain plants might disrupt their ability to phase between dimensions." Professor Kalish looked interested for the first time. "That is actually logical. If the creatures rely on quantum field manipulation to avoid detection, certain molecular vibrations could interfere with their control mechanisms." Jake felt a spark of hope. "The Academy's botanical gardens have plants from hundreds of worlds. I found several species that contain compounds similar to the ones my grandmother used." He had spent the morning walking through the gardens with a chemistry scanner looking for plants with the right chemical signatures. The gardens were amazing, with glowing flowers and trees that sang in the wind. But Jake had focused only on finding the ingredients he needed. Dr. Vexilla still looked doubtful. "Even if your theory is correct, how do we know these alien plants will have the same effect as Earth plants?" "We test it," Jake said simply. "What do we have to lose? The students are getting sicker every day, and you are planning to close the academy anyway." The Zentari doctors talked among themselves in their musical language for several minutes. Jake could not understand the words, but he could tell they were debating whether to try his idea. Finally, Professor Kalish turned back to him. "We will allow you to prepare your remedy, but we must monitor everything carefully. If any students show negative reactions, we will stop immediately." Jake nodded eagerly. "I need help collecting the plants and preparing large quantities of the tea. And we need to treat not just the students, but their rooms and bedding too." Dr. Foster volunteered to assist him, along with 2 young Zentari medical students who seemed curious about human folk medicine. They spent the afternoon in the gardens, gathering armfuls of the plants Jake had identified. The first plant looked like Earth chrysanthemums, but with purple petals that sparkled in the sunlight. When Jake crushed the flowers, they released a sharp, clean scent that reminded him of his grandmother's garden. The second plant had leaves similar to mint, but they were silver-colored and felt warm to the touch. The third was a climbing vine with small white flowers that smelled like lavender, mixed with something spicy. In the Academy's food preparation center, Jake showed the others how to make the tea. He remembered watching his grandmother work, measuring ingredients by sight and smell rather than precise amounts. She had always said cooking and healing were arts, not sciences. "We need to boil the water first," Jake explained as they worked with large pots. "Then add the flowers and let them steep for exactly 10 minutes. The leaves go in next for 5 minutes. The vine flowers are last just for 2 minutes at the end." As the tea brewed, it filled the entire kitchen with a powerful aroma. The yao scent was pleasant but very strong, with layers of different fragrances that seemed to shift and change. Some of the alien kitchen staff came to see what was causing such an interesting smell. Dr. Foster tested the tea with her medical scanners. "The chemical composition is fascinating," she said. "The compounds are creating harmonic resonances I have never seen before. It might actually work." They prepared enough tea to treat 50 students in their living areas. Jake wanted to start with the most severely affected cases to see if the treatment would help. If it worked, they could make more tea for everyone else. The first student they treated was a young being from the Andromeda sector who looked like a walking flower. She had bite marks covering most of her petal-like skin and had been too weak to attend classes for 3 days. Jake and Dr. Foster helped her drink a cup of the warm tea. "It tastes strange," she said in her whispering voice, "but not unpleasant. It makes my mouth feel tingly." Next, they washed her bedding and room surfaces with the cooled tea. Jake placed small bowls of the liquid in corners and cracks where the quantum bedbugs might be hiding, just as his grandmother had done. The smell filled the room with its complex fragrance. They treated 4 more students in the same way, then waited to see what would happen. Jake felt nervous and excited at the same time. If his grandmother's remedy failed, hundreds of students would be sent home, and the academy would close its exchange program. That night, Jake sat in the medical center monitoring the students they had treated. The cameras in their rooms showed normal sleep patterns, but he watched carefully for any sign of the tiny shadow creatures that had been feeding on them. Around midnight, something amazing happened. In the room of the flower-like student, Jake saw several small shadows appear on the walls, but instead of approaching her sleeping form, they seemed confused and agitated. They moved in random directions, bumping into walls and furniture. "Look at this," Jake called to Dr. Foster. "The creatures are acting strange." She came to watch the screen with him. The quantum bed bugs were clearly present, but their behavior was completely different. Instead of working together to feed, they seemed lost and disoriented. After a few minutes, they faded away entirely. "The tea is disrupting their navigation systems," Dr. Foster said with excitement. "They cannot coordinate their attacks anymore." By morning, none of the 5 treated students had new bite marks. Even better, their existing bites were beginning to heal properly for the first time since the attacks had started. The flower-like student was able to get out of bed and walk to breakfast on her own. Professor Kalish was amazed when he saw the results. "In one night, your simple plant tea accomplished what our most advanced treatments could not achieve. How is this possible?" Jake smiled, thinking of his grandmother's wisdom. "Sometimes the old ways work because they have been tested by time and practice. My grandmother learned from her grandmother, who learned from hers. Generations of people dealing with pest problems found solutions that actually work." The Zentari doctors quickly approved treating all affected students with Jake's remedy. They organized teams to gather more plants and prepare large batches of tea. The entire academy mobilized to wash bedding, clean rooms, and place bowls of the aromatic liquid everywhere the quantum bed bugs might hide. Within 24 hours, the mysterious bites stopped appearing entirely. Students who had been sick for weeks began recovering their strength. The quantum creatures, confused and unable to function properly, seemed to have abandoned the academy completely. Word of Jake's success spread quickly through the school. Students from dozens of different worlds came to thank him personally. His simple Earth remedy had solved a problem that the galaxy's best scientists could not understand. But Jake knew the real credit belonged to his grandmother and all the practical people like her who had learned to survive and thrive using whatever resources they had available. Their wisdom had saved the day once again. 3 weeks had passed since Jake's tea had solved the quantum bedbug problem. The academy was back to normal, with students attending classes and no one getting mysterious bite marks during the night. Jake sat in his xenobiology class listening to Professor Kalish explain advanced healing techniques to a room full of attentive aliens. "Before we continue with molecular regeneration therapy," the professor said, "I want to discuss something important. Sometimes the most effective solutions come from unexpected places." Jake felt his cheeks grow warm as every student in the class turned to look at him. Word of his success had spread throughout the academy and beyond. He had received messages from medical researchers on dozens of different worlds, all wanting to know more about Earth's traditional remedies. After class, Vexthon and Zilara walked with Jake through the academy gardens. Both of his friends had fully recovered from their bite wounds and were back to their normal, energetic selves. Vexthon's crystal body glowed bright with health, and Zilara could once again climb walls with all 6 arms. "I still cannot believe it worked," Zilara said, swinging from a low tree branch. All those powerful Zentari machines could not help us, but your grandmother's tea fixed everything in one night. Vexthon's musical voice chimed with agreement. My people have advanced technology that can reshape matter at the atomic level, but we never learned to make simple plant tea. There is wisdom in your grandmother's knowledge that our computers cannot calculate. Jake smiled as he remembered the message he had received from his grandmother that morning. She had been amazed to learn that her old pest control methods were being studied by alien scientists across the galaxy. I always told you those old remedies were good for something, she had written. Now the whole universe knows what farm folks have known for generations. Dr. Foster joined them as they walked past the fountain in the center of the gardens. She looked happy and relaxed for the first time since the crisis had begun. The medical center was no longer filled with sick students, and she could focus on normal health maintenance instead of mysterious illnesses. Jake, I have some interesting news, she said. The Galactic Medical Council wants to create a new research program studying traditional remedies from different worlds. They want you to help design the curriculum. Jake stopped walking and stared at her. Me? But I'm just a student. I do not know enough to teach other people. You know more than you think, Dr. Foster replied. You understand something that many advanced civilizations have forgotten, that simple solutions can be just as effective as complex ones. The galaxy needs people who can think differently about problems. Professor Kalish approached their group with a large smile on his blue face. In his hands, he carried a small device that looked like a crystalline flower. Jake, this is for you, he said, offering the gift. It is a quantum resonance detector, calibrated specifically to identify creatures like the ones that attacked our students. Jake accepted the device carefully. It felt warm in his hands and pulsed with soft light. What is it for? Insurance, the professor replied. We have sent similar devices to academies and colonies throughout this sector of the galaxy. If these quantum parasites appear anywhere else, we will be ready to treat them immediately with your tea recipe. The idea that his grandmother's remedy might be needed on other worlds was both exciting and overwhelming. Jake had never imagined that something he learned on a small Ohio farm could have importance across the entire galaxy. Over the next few days, Jake received more visitors than he could count. Scientists, doctors, and researchers from many different species came to the academy specifically to meet him. They wanted to learn about Earth's traditional medicine and how humans approached problem-solving. A delegation of elderly Zentari healers was particularly interested in his grandmother's notebook. They spent hours examining her handwritten recipes and methods, treating the yellowed pages like precious historical documents. Your grandmother understood something we had forgotten, the eldest healer told Jake. True healing comes from understanding the natural world and working with it, not against it. Our advanced technology made us think we could solve any problem with machines and computers. Jake thought about this as he prepared for his final examinations. The semester was ending, and soon he would return to Earth with more knowledge and experience than he had ever dreamed possible. But he had learned that the most valuable lessons were not the ones he had expected. His xenobiology exam went well, but Jake was most proud of his final project. He had written a comprehensive guide comparing traditional remedies from 12 different worlds, showing how various species had developed similar solutions to common problems. The paper demonstrated that practical wisdom existed everywhere, not just on Earth. Professor Kalish graded the project personally and gave Jake the highest marks possible. This work will be required reading for all first-year medical students, he announced. You have shown us that we must respect and study the traditional knowledge of every species, not just the most technologically advanced ones. As graduation day approached, Jake felt both excited to go home and sad to leave his new friends. The academy had become a second home, and he had learned to love its strange beauty and diverse community. The graduation ceremony was held in the Great Hall overlooking the Purple Sea. Students from 47 different worlds received their certificates in a celebration that lasted for hours. When Jake's name was called, the entire assembly stood and applauded, something that had never happened before in the Academy's long history. Vexthon and Zilara presented him with their own gift, a small plant cutting from each of their homeworlds. For your grandmother's garden, Zilara explained, so she can grow remedies that work on creatures from across the galaxy. Jake carefully packed the alien plants in special containers that would keep them alive during the journey back to Earth. He could hardly wait to see his grandmother's face when he showed her the gifts and told her about everything that had happened. On his last day at the academy, Jake stood once again at the window looking out at the stars. But this time, he was not nervous or uncertain about the future. He understood now that humans had something special to offer the galactic community, not advanced technology or superior intelligence, but a different way of thinking about problems. Doctor, Foster found him there as the transport ship prepared to depart. Are you ready to go home? She asked. Jake nodded but kept looking at the stars. I am ready, but I know this is not really the end. Someday I will come back, and maybe I can help other species learn what my grandmother taught me. I am sure you will, Dr. Foster agreed. The galaxy is a big place with many problems that need solving. People like you, who can see simple solutions to complex challenges, will always be needed. As the transport ship left Kethavar's orbit, Jake wrote a long message to his family describing everything he had experienced. He saved the best part for last, telling them about the new research program the Galactic Medical Council wanted to establish on Earth. They want to build a center for traditional medicine right in our hometown, he wrote. Grandmother will be the chief consultant, teaching alien scientists about plant remedies and practical healing. Our little farm is going to become the most important place in the galaxy for learning about simple solutions to big problems. Jake smiled as he sent the message and settled back to watch the stars stream past the window. He was going home with knowledge that would help both humans and aliens, but more importantly, he was returning with a deeper understanding of his own heritage. His grandmother had been right all along. Sometimes the old ways really were the best ways. And now, thanks to a few cups of tea made from alien plants, the entire galaxy was beginning to learn that simple wisdom could be just as powerful as the most advanced technology in the universe. Jake Collins stood at the viewing window of the transport ship and watched Kepler Station Academy grow larger in front of him. The massive structure spun slowly in space, its metal walls catching light from the two bright stars nearby. He had never seen anything so big floating in space before. His hand shook a little as he picked up his single travel bag. The transport ship docked with a loud clang that echoed through the halls. Jake followed the other passengers toward the exit. Most of them were aliens he had only seen in pictures before. Some walked on four legs, others floated in the air, and a few looked like they were made of living crystal. Welcome to Kepler Station Academy, said a voice over the speakers. All new students report to dormitory level 7 for room assignments. Jake found his way through the long corridors. The walls were covered with symbols he could not read. Other students moved past him, talking in languages that sounded like music, clicking sounds or electronic beeps. None of them looked at him. He wondered if they even knew what a human was. At the dormitory desk, a robot handed him a keycard and pointed down a hallway. Room 47C, the robot said in perfect English. You will share this space with 3 other first-year students. Jake found his room and pressed the keycard against the door. It slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, he saw 3 beings unlike anything from Earth. They all turned to look at him when he entered. You must be the human, said the first one. This creature looked like it was made of blue ice or crystal. Its body was tall and thin, with arms that ended in sharp points instead of hands. I am Zixtal from the world Frost 7. We heard Earth was sending someone, but we did not expect you to look so ordinary. The second being floated in a tank of water that moved with it. Its skin was green and covered in spots that glowed with soft light. I am Velnara from Aquatica Prime. It said, Your planet only has one sun, correct? How do you survive with so little light? The third roommate looked like a giant bug standing on 2 legs. Its head had many eyes that moved in different directions. Kethvor from Kaitinos, it said. I can see in all directions at once. Your species can only see forward. This seems very limiting. Nice to meet you all, Jake said. I am Jake Collins from Earth. He set his bag on the empty bed and began to unpack his clothes. He had brought very little with him. Earth's space program was new, and they could not afford to send much weight to other star systems. As Jake unpacked, his roommates watched him with interest. He pulled out his basic clothes, a few books, and some personal items from home. Near the bottom of his bag, he found his small hand mirror. It was nothing special, just a piece of polished metal with a handle that his sister had given him before he left Earth. Jake held up the mirror to check if his hair looked okay after the long trip. He ran his fingers through it and made sure his face was clean. All three of his roommates began to make sounds. Zixtal's body made a ringing noise like breaking glass. Velnara bubbled in its tank. Heatstrok clicked its mouthparts together rapidly. Jake realized they were laughing at him. "What is that thing?" Velnara asked, still bubbling with amusement. "It is a mirror," Jake said. "I use it to see how I look." This made them laugh even harder. Zixtal's crystal body rang like bells. "You need a device to see yourself? How primitive. My people can sense our own appearance through crystal resonance. We feel how we look. My species has biolight patches on our skin," Velnara added. "They change color to show our health and mood. We do not need to look at ourselves because others can see our condition immediately." Heatstrok's many eyes focused on Jake. "I can see my own body with my rear-facing eyes. I am never unaware of my appearance. Your species must be very limited if you need tools for such basic functions." Jake felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. He quickly put the mirror back in his bag. "It is just something humans use," he said quietly. "No wonder your species was so slow to develop space travel," Zixtal continued. "If you need mirrors to function, what other simple things can you not do naturally?" The other two roommates made more laughing sounds. Jake sat on his bed and said nothing. He had been excited to come to Kepler Station Academy. Earth had worked for years to get accepted into the Galactic Education Exchange. He was supposed to be representing all of humanity. Now he felt like he was already failing. "Do not worry," Velnara said, trying to sound kind. "I am sure there are things your species does well. Perhaps you are good at simple tasks." Jake unpacked the rest of his things in silence. His roommates went back to their own activities. Zixtal practiced changing the shape of its crystal body. Velnara studied holographic displays that floated in its water tank. Heatstrok worked on multiple homework assignments at the same time, using different eyes to read different screens. As the lights in the room dimmed for the sleep cycle, Jake lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling. Through the room's small window, he could see the two bright stars that lit up this part of space. They were much brighter and hotter than Earth's sun. He thought about the mirror in his bag. His sister had given it to him, saying, "Remember to take care of yourself out there." She meant he should stay healthy and safe. But now the mirror seemed like a symbol of everything that made humans seem backward compared to other species. Jake closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Tomorrow he would start classes with students from dozens of different worlds. He hoped he could prove that humans belonged here, even if they needed mirrors to see themselves. Outside the window, the two stars burned brighter than ever, sending waves of heat and light toward the space station. None of the students knew that this light would soon become dangerous. They all slept peacefully, thinking they were safe inside their advanced technology. But Jake Collins, from Earth, the human, with the primitive mirror, would be the one to save them all. 3 days had passed since Jake arrived at Kepler Station Academy. He was starting to get used to his daily routine. Every morning, he attended lectures with students from 40 different worlds. The topics were things he had never learned on: Earth, galactic history, alien biology, and space engineering that was centuries ahead of human technology. His roommates still treated him like a curiosity. They were polite, but clearly thought humans were a primitive species. In the dining hall, other students would point at Jake and whisper to each other. He heard words like backward and simple more than once. Jake tried to focus on his studies, but something was bothering him. The space station felt warmer than when he first arrived. During his second night, he had to remove his blanket while sleeping, By the third day, he was sweating during classes. "Is it getting hotter in here?" Jake asked his roommates during their evening study time. Zixtal looked up from its crystal homework display. "The temperature is within normal ranges for our species. Perhaps humans are not well adapted to space environments." "My water tank maintains perfect temperature control," Velnara added. "I have not noticed any changes." Kethvor did not even look up from its multiple study screens. "The hive worlds taught us to ignore minor environmental fluctuations. You should learn to adapt." Jake said nothing more about it, but he kept noticing small changes. In the corridors, he saw maintenance, robots working more often than before. Some of them were checking air vents and temperature sensors. The cafeteria staff seemed to be working harder to keep food at the right temperature. During his xenobiology class, Professor Hulrek was explaining the breathing systems of different species. The old reptilian teacher had scales that usually gleamed under the classroom lights. Today, Jake noticed that the professor's scales looked duller than before. "Each species has evolved to survive in their home environment," Professor Hulrek said. "The Zephyrians breathe methane. The crystalline people of Frost 7 absorb energy directly from cold. The aquatic species filter oxygen from water." Jake raised his hand. "Professor, what happens when a species is placed in an environment that is outside their normal range?" The reptilian teacher turned its large yellow eyes toward Jake. "An interesting question, young human. Most species have very narrow tolerance ranges. Remove them from their ideal conditions, and they quickly become unable to function. Some may even die." After class, Jake walked through the station's main corridors. He was definitely sweating more than usual, but he felt fine otherwise. Around him, he started to notice that other students were showing signs of stress. Zixtal's crystal body, which was usually bright blue, had areas that looked cloudy and gray. When Jake mentioned this, Zixtal said it was just tired from studying. Velnara's skin spots, which normally glowed with steady green light, were flickering on and off. The water in its tank looked less clear than before. Kethvor was moving more slowly. Its many eyes were not tracking as quickly as they usually did. Jake went to the station's information center and asked to see the environmental reports. The computer system showed him charts and graphs he barely understood. But one thing was clear. The average temperature throughout the station had risen by 3 degrees over the past 4 days. "Computer, why is the temperature rising?" Jake asked. "The binary star system is entering a period of increased solar activity," the computer replied. "Solar radiation has increased by 15%. Environmental systems are compensating." "Are the environmental systems working properly?" "All systems are functioning within normal parameters. However, cooling demand has increased beyond standard projections." Jake did not understand all the technical words, but he knew this meant the space station was getting more heat from the 2 nearby stars. The cooling systems were working harder to keep everyone comfortable. That evening in the dining hall, Jake watched his fellow students more carefully. Many of the ice world species were eating less food than usual. Students from cold planets were gathering in groups as if trying to share body temperature. The aquatic species were spending more time in the water fountains placed around the dining area. Jake saw several fish-like students splash water on themselves repeatedly. Even the insect species who came from worlds with controlled climates seemed sluggish. Their usual quick movements had become slow and careful. But Jake felt fine. He was warm, yes, but humans were used to temperature changes. On Earth, people lived in deserts, tropical forests, and frozen mountains. His body knew how to handle heat by sweating and adjusting his behavior. "Hey, Zixtal," Jake said when he returned to their room. "Are you feeling okay? You look kind of cloudy today." His crystal roommate made an annoyed ringing sound. "I am perfectly fine. Crystal beings do not get sick like biological species." But Jake could see stress fractures forming in Zixtal's arms. They were tiny lines that ran through the blue crystal like cracks in ice. Velnara was floating lower in its tank than usual. "My biolights are just adjusting to the new environment," it said. But its voice sounded weaker than before. Kethvor was lying on its bed, which was unusual. The insect species normally never rested during study time. "I am simply conserving energy," it said when Jake asked about it. Jake lay in his bed that night and listened to the sounds of the space station. The air circulation systems were running louder than before. Through the walls, he could hear the hum of cooling units working harder than normal. Outside their window, the two stars blazed brighter than ever. Their light was so intense that Jake had to close the window shade completely to sleep. On his fourth night at the academy, Jake was awakened by a new sound. Emergency alarms were ringing softly throughout the station. The lights in the corridor were flashing yellow, which meant there was a minor problem that the crew was handling. Jake got up and checked on his roommates. Zixtal's crystal body was definitely more cloudy than before. The stress fractures in its arms had grown longer. Velnara was floating at the bottom of its tank, barely moving. Kethvor's many eyes were closed and its breathing was slow. "Guys, I think something is wrong," Jake said. "You all look sick." "Humans always worry about nothing," Zixtal said weakly. "Advanced species like us can handle minor environmental changes. The station's systems are designed for our comfort," Velnara added. "There is no danger." But Jake could see that his roommates were suffering. Their bodies were not designed to handle the rising heat. They came from worlds with stable, cool climates. Their species had never needed to adapt to temperature changes. Jake, however, came from a world where the weather changed every day, where some places were burning hot and others were freezing cold. His human body knew how to survive in changing conditions. He was beginning to realize that maybe being primitive was not such a bad thing after all. The next morning would bring new challenges that would test every species on the station, and Jake's simple human adaptations would prove to be more valuable than anyone had imagined. Jake woke up to the sound of loud alarms throughout the space station. The lights in his room were flashing red instead of their normal soft white. He sat up quickly and looked around at his roommates. Zixtal was barely moving. The crystal being's body had turned almost completely gray, and the stress fractures now covered most of its arms and chest. It looked like it might break apart at any moment. Velnara was floating at the very bottom of its water tank. The green spots on its skin had stopped glowing completely. Its breathing was so slow that Jake had to watch carefully to see if it was still alive. Kethvor was lying on its side. The insect being's many eyes were closed, and its body was making weak clicking sounds with each breath. "Emergency announcement," came a voice over the station's communication system. "All students report to designated safe areas immediately. Environmental systems are experiencing critical failures." Jake jumped out of bed and ran to his roommates. "Come on, we need to get out of here." Zixtal tried to stand, but its legs cracked under its weight. "Cannot move," it said in a voice that sounded like breaking glass. Velnara did not respond when Jake tapped on its tank. The water around it had become cloudy and warm. Kethvor opened one eye and looked at Jake. "Too hot," it whispered. "Cannot regulate body temperature. Hive worlds always kept us at perfect climate." Jake felt sweat running down his face, but he was still able to move and think clearly. He realized that while he was uncomfortable, his roommates were dying. The door to their room slid open and Professor Holrek appeared. The reptilian teacher's scales were now completely dull and it was breathing heavily. "Students must evacuate to level 3, the professor said. "Cooling systems have failed throughout most of the station." "My roommates can't move," Jake said. "They're too sick from the heat." Professor Holrek looked at the 3 alien students and made a worried sound. "This is worse than I thought. The binary stars have entered full solar flare activity. The radiation is overloading all our cooling systems." Jake helped the professor lift Zixtal. The crystal being was so hot that Jake almost burned his hands touching it. They carried it out into the corridor where Jake saw dozens of other students in similar condition. Students from ice worlds were lying on the floor, their bodies steaming in the hot air. Aquatic species were gathered around water fountains, desperately trying to keep their skin wet. Insect students from climate-controlled worlds were barely conscious, but the few students from desert worlds or planets with variable climates were still walking around. They looked uncomfortable but were able to help others. "Why are humans not affected as badly?" Professor Holrek asked Jake as they carried Velnara's water tank toward the elevators. "Earth has lots of different climates. Jake explained. Hot deserts, cold mountains, humid forests. Humans had to learn to survive in all kinds of weather. Our bodies can handle temperature changes. They reached the elevator, but it was not working. A sign said that power was being redirected to life support systems. We have to use the emergency stairs, Jake said. He picked up HFY, who weighed less than he expected. The insect being was so weak it could barely hold on to Jake's shoulders. As they climbed down the stairs, Jake saw maintenance robots moving through the corridors. They were carrying tools and working frantically on wall panels. Some of the robots had stopped working completely, their circuits overloaded by the heat. How much hotter is it going to get? Jake asked the professor. The computer estimates another 5-degree increase before the solar flares end, Professor Hullreck replied. But our cooling systems are already failing. Most species cannot survive much more heat. They finally reached level 3, where hundreds of students were gathered in the largest room on the station. Medical robots were moving between groups, checking on the sickest students. But Jake could see that many of the robots were also overheating and working slowly. Jake found a spot for his roommates near one of the few working air vents. He used his shirt to wipe water on Zixtal's crystal body, trying to cool it down. He splashed water from emergency containers on Velnara's skin. He fanned HFY with a piece of paper to help air circulate around the insect being. "Thank you," Velnara whispered. "You are helping us even though we laughed at you." "We called your species primitive," Zixtal said weakly. "But you are the only one who can still function." Jake looked around the room. It was true. Almost all. The alien students were suffering from the heat. Even the ones from warmer worlds were having trouble. But the handful of humans, desert dwellers, and species from planets with extreme weather were still able to move around and help others. "Attention all students," came an announcement. "Primary cooling systems have completely failed. Backup systems are failing one by one. We are working to repair the main cooling units, but it may take several hours." Several hours. Jake looked at his roommates and knew they did not have several hours. Zixtal's body was developing new cracks every few minutes. Velnara was barely breathing. HFY had stopped moving entirely. Around the room, other students were collapsing. Some of the Ice World species had already stopped moving. Medical robots were running out of supplies to help them. Jake stood up and walked to the room's main window. Outside, the 2 bright stars were blazing with solar flares. Streams of energy and radiation poured from their surfaces toward the space station. The light was so bright it hurt to look at directly, but as Jake stared at the dangerous stars, an idea began to form in his mind. He thought about the mirror in his bag back in his room. The mirror his roommates had laughed at. The simple, primitive human tool. Humans had used mirrors for more than just looking at themselves. They had used them to signal across long distances, to start fires, to redirect light and heat. Jake realized that what everyone thought was primitive, human technology might be exactly what they needed to survive. He looked back at his dying roommates and made a decision. He was going to have to go back to his room and get that mirror, even if the corridors were too hot for most species to survive. Even if it meant risking his own life to save the students who had called him primitive. Jake left his dying roommates in the safe room and ran back through the overheated corridors. The air was so hot it burned his lungs with each breath. Sweat poured down his face and soaked through his clothes. But he kept moving. Most of the hallways were empty now. The few maintenance robots still working moved slowly, their circuits struggling with the extreme heat. Emergency lights flickered on and off as power systems failed throughout the station. Jake reached his dormitory room and burst through the door. The temperature inside was unbearable. He could see heat waves rising from the metal walls, but he forced himself to move to his bag and pull out the small mirror. As he held it in his hands, he thought about what his sister had said when she gave it to him. "Take care of yourself out there." She had meant more than just his appearance. She had meant survive. Jake ran back toward the safe room but stopped when he passed a large observation window. Through the thick glass, he could see the 2 blazing stars that were killing everyone on the station. Solar flares danced across their surfaces, sending waves of deadly radiation toward them. But Jake also saw something else. Floating in space around the station were dozens of small maintenance drones. These robots were designed to work on the outside of the station, fixing damage and maintaining systems. Most of them had shut down to avoid the radiation, but a few were still active. Jake looked at his mirror and then at the drones. An idea that had been growing in his mind suddenly became clear. He held up the mirror and angled it toward the window. The light from the two stars hit the mirror's surface and bounced back in a focused beam. The reflected light was so bright it left spots in Jake's vision. Humans had been using mirrors to signal for thousands of years. They had used them to communicate across vast distances by reflecting sunlight. Native peoples on Earth had used them to send messages across mountains and deserts. Jake began moving the mirror back and forth, creating flashes of light that shot out toward the maintenance drones. The pattern he made was simple. 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes. It was an old Earth distress signal that meant, "Help me." At first, nothing happened. The drones continued their slow automatic movements around the station. But then one of them stopped and turned toward Jake's window. Its sensors had detected the regular pattern of light flashes. Jake continued signaling. He had learned about Morse code in school on Earth. Most humans knew at least basic light signals because they were simple and required no technology except something reflective. The drone began moving toward the window where Jake stood. He could see its mechanical arms extending tools as it approached. Jake changed his signal pattern, pointing the reflected light toward different parts of the station's outer hull. "Come on," Jake whispered to himself. "Understand what I'm trying to show you." The maintenance drone followed the light beam to a section of the station's hull that Jake was pointing to. There, hidden behind protective panels, were manual override switches for the emergency cooling systems. These switches had been installed as a backup in case the computer systems failed. But they could only be activated from outside the station, and only by maintenance drones with the right tools. Jake continued using his mirror to guide the drone. He reflected light onto the specific panels that needed to be opened. The drone's programming was designed to respond to maintenance signals, and Jake's light patterns were triggering its automatic repair functions. The drone extended a cutting tool and began opening the first panel. Inside, Jake could see the manual switch that would activate emergency cooling vents throughout Level 7. More drones were approaching now. They had detected the maintenance activity and come to help. Jake used his mirror to direct them to different parts of the station's hull. Soon, 6 drones were working to open various emergency panels. "Please work," Jake said as he watched the first drone reach the manual switch. "Please let this work." The drone activated the switch. Throughout the station, Jake heard the sound of air vents opening. Cool air that had been trapped in backup systems began flowing into the overheated corridors. Jake directed the other drones to more switches. Each one they activated brought more emergency cooling online. The computer systems had failed, but these manual backups could still function if operated correctly. Jake ran back toward the safe room, still carrying his mirror. As he moved through the corridors, he could feel cooler air beginning to circulate. The emergency vents were working. When he burst into the safe room, he found Professor Hulrek and the medical robots working frantically over the sickest students. Many of the ice world species had stopped moving completely. "Professor," Jake shouted, "I got some of the emergency cooling systems working." The reptilian teacher looked up with hope in its large eyes. "How?" "The computer systems are completely down." Jake held up his mirror. "I used this to signal the maintenance drones outside. They activated the manual override switches." "Professor," Hulrek stared at the simple piece of polished metal. "That primitive tool? You used it to communicate with our most advanced robots?" "Light signals are universal," Jake explained. "Any species with eyes can understand them. I just had to get the drone's attention and show them what needed to be fixed." Around the room, students were beginning to stir as cooler air flowed in through the vents. Zixtal's crystal body was still cracked, but the gray cloudiness was starting to clear. Velnara's biolights flickered weakly but steadily. Cathavor opened several of its eyes and made a soft clicking sound. But Jake could see this was just the beginning. The emergency systems he had activated would help, but they were not enough to cool the entire station. He needed to signal more, drones, and activate more backup systems. I need to get back to the observation windows, Jake told the professor. There are more emergency systems I can activate. It is too dangerous, Professor Hulrek said. The corridors are still too hot for most species. Jake wiped sweat from his face. But not too hot for humans. We evolved to handle this kind of heat. Our bodies are designed for it. He looked around the room at hundreds of alien students who were suffering because their advanced biology could not adapt to changing conditions. They had evolved for perfect controlled environments, but Jake came from a world of constant change and challenges. Keep taking care of them, Jake said, holding up his mirror. I'm going to save everyone with this primitive human tool. Jake ran back into the overheated corridors, ready to prove that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective. His mirror caught the deadly light of the twin stars and turned it into a tool of salvation. Word about Jake's protein bars spread faster than he expected. The next morning, 3 students knocked on his door before breakfast. They had heard from Veltor about the amazing food that gave real energy. The first visitor was Krektos, an insect-like being from the Rigel system. His body was covered in smooth green armor, and his large compound eyes reflected light like mirrors. The second was Namale, who came from the water moons of Saturn. She moved on 6 tentacles and breathed, through gills on the sides of her neck. The third was a tall, thin creature named Zixara, whose skin changed colors as he spoke. Please, Krektos said in his clicking voice. Veltor told us about your organic fuel source. My energy systems have been failing for weeks. The replicator. Food provides no real nutrition. Jake looked at his remaining protein bars. He only had 12 left, and he had planned to make them last for months. But seeing the tired faces of these alien students, he couldn't say no. Okay, Jake said, but I can't give you all of them. Let me share 1 bar among the 4 of you. He broke 1 protein bar into 4 pieces. Each student took a piece and ate it carefully. Within minutes, all of them began to show signs of increased energy. Krektos's armor plates brightened to a healthier green color. Namale's tentacles moved with more strength. Zixara's skin shifted to bright, happy colors. This is incredible, Namale said, her voice bubbly with excitement. I haven't felt this good in months. What did you call this food? Protein bars, Jake said. My grandmother makes them from crickets, nuts, honey, and dandelion leaves. Crickets, Krektos perked up with interest. Those are small earth insects, yes? We have similar creatures on my homeworld, but we never thought to eat them. Jake spent the rest of the morning explaining how his grandmother harvested ingredients from her backyard. The alien students were fascinated by the idea of making food from things that grew naturally instead of using machines. By afternoon, Jake had a problem. More students kept coming to his room asking for the magical earth food. He had given away 8 of his protein bars and was running out fast. That's when he met Lisa Park. Lisa was another human student, but she had grown up on the Luna colonies near Earth's moon. She was 2 years older than Jake and had been at the academy for 6 months. She knocked on Jake's door just as he was turning away another group of hungry students. I heard there's a human here who's been feeding half the school, Lisa said, with a grin. I'm Lisa Park. I think we need to talk. Jake invited her in, and they sat on his bed while Veltor listened from his rock pile. Lisa was smart and practical. She had been studying the local plants on Zirion Prime for a research project and knew which ones were safe to eat. Look, Lisa said, you can't keep giving away your grandmother's food to every student who asks, but I think we can make more using local ingredients. More protein bars? Better than that. I've found at least 6 plants on this planet that are highly nutritious, but the aliens here think they're weeds. There's also a type of beetle that lives in the academy gardens. They're full of protein and reproduce really fast. Jake was interested. You think we can make food that works as well as my grandmother's bars? I think we can make food that works even better. We just need to experiment a little. That evening, Jake and Lisa snuck out to the academy gardens. The grounds were huge, with plants from hundreds of different worlds growing in carefully controlled sections. Lisa led him to an area where local Zirion Prime plants grew wild between the organized garden beds. See these purple leaves? Lisa pointed to plants that looked like lettuce but with darker colors. They have twice the vitamins of anything Earth grows, and these seeds here are basically natural energy capsules. They also found the beetles Lisa had mentioned. They were about the size of earth crickets but had bright blue shells. Jake was nervous about eating alien bugs, but Lisa assured him they were safe. She had been studying them for weeks. Back in Jake's room, they ground up the beetle shells, mixed them with the purple leaves and seeds, and added some sweet sap Lisa had collected from a local tree. The result looked different from Jake's original, protein bars, but when Veltor tried it, his golden glow became even brighter than before. "This mixture is superior to your Earth bars," Veltor announced. "My energy levels are now at 110% of normal capacity." Within 3 days, Jake and Lisa had a production system going. They would gather ingredients every evening and make new bars every night. Lisa was good at organizing, and Jake was good at the actual food preparation. They started with just enough bars for their friends, but word kept spreading. Students began offering them valuable items in trade for the bars. Krektos gave them a small device that could identify which local plants were safe to eat. Namale brought them rare minerals from her homeworld that could be ground up and added to the bars for extra nutrition. Zixera used his color-changing abilities to keep watch while they gathered ingredients. The trade network grew quickly. Students would leave requests outside Jake's door along with payment in the form of rare books, useful tools, or credits from their homeworlds. Jake and Lisa found themselves running an underground food business without meaning to. The problem was that Academy security was starting to notice. Dr. Zenth Ka, a reptilian professor with sharp yellow eyes, had been watching the improved performance of certain students in her classes. Captain Raxvor, the head of Academy security, had received reports of unauthorized food distribution. "We need to be more careful," Lisa warned Jake one evening as they prepared a new batch of protein bars. "I heard some of the professors talking about investigating unusual student activity." Jake nodded, but he couldn't stop now. Too many students were depending on them for real nutrition. The replicator food was getting worse every day, and their bars were the only thing keeping half the academy healthy. He just hoped they could figure out a solution before the authorities shut them down.